Welcome, everyone, and thank you for joining us this evening for Lifetime Adoption's webinar for adoptive parents. My name is Kim King, and I'm co-hosting with Libby Murray, and we're excited to have you with us here this evening. We have an action-packed webinar lined up. Libby has put together some nice slides to guide us through our conversation, and we're just excited to be here with you all. So if you are new to Lifetime, maybe it's your first time joining us for a webinar, I just want to go over some information so you can know how to get in the loop with us. Of course, the very first thing to be considered for our program is to fill out our free application online, which is at lifetimeadoption.com/apply. But if you have some questions that maybe you want to talk about or some aspects of your circumstances that you'd like to talk about one-on-one prior to filling out the application, of course, we have an open door policy, and our number is 1-800-923-6784, or you are welcome to email adopt@lifetimeadoption.com. Of course, join us on Facebook, facebook.com/open.adoption, and there are always great conversations, and it's a great source of encouragement and community there on Facebook as well. So with that, Libby, I hand it over to you.
Oh, okay. Well, I don't think anyone can deny that we are well into the fall season, and I had to pinch myself a little bit to sort of come out of a shock that we are over halfway through October, just barely, but still. And what this means to most people is we start seeing advertisements for Christmas, and food goes on sale for Thanksgiving at the stores. All the end caps are full of pumpkin. Starbucks is going crazy with their pumpkin spice latte promotions. You know, everything about fall just brings up holidays. And one thing that came to mind recently was how often, you know, Kim, you work with a lot of families on the front end of their Lifetime program where they're learning about Lifetime and they're learning about how they want to pursue adoption, how they want to create their adoption plan. And then, you know, a lot of times I will work with families once they're already entrenched in our program, and we hear it on both sides. I hope I adopt before Christmas. I hope I adopt before the next holiday. I hope I adopt before whatever milestone comes to mind. And I just thought this would be a really great time to address this, because I think it brings up a lot of exciting hopes, but it also, for a lot of people, brings up anxiety, fears, doubt, pressure. And that's what I kept going back to. Kim, you and I talked about this topic, and we just kept thinking about the pressure that families add when their expectations may be a little off kilt. Especially, I would say, you know, if you're on the call tonight and there's anything that you haven't yet done to make progress towards your adoption, that I would say that this time of year may even emphasize what hasn't happened yet, especially if there's still something in your court to take care of, if there's still something on your plate that you need to check off. And so that's why we're calling tonight's webinar, I Hope I Adopt Before Christmas, because we want to talk about the common I hope I adopt before, and then you fill in the blank statements that we hear from adopting parents, and we want to encourage you because we take very seriously how passionate each of you are about adding a child to your lives and how deep that longing runs. Probably many of you, maybe for years, have been wanting to add a child to your family. Maybe you've even been thinking about adoption before. Maybe you've already been trying to adopt and it hasn't happened yet. And we understand that it could be a sensitive topic, but the response that I saw, Kim, just to promoting tonight's webinar and inviting people here shows me that this is definitely on everyone's mind. So I'm excited to see everyone here, and I really want to encourage all of you to type your questions as we go through some of these and ask how do other families handle that kind of pressure, or you know, what is that like, or what is a reasonable expectation. So again, like Kim said, if this is your first time getting to know Lifetime, welcome. I definitely see a lot of familiar faces too, and so I just want to say I'm glad all of you can make time to join us tonight, and I really think it'll be a good time to refocus and maybe renew that that hopeful spirit in the right position, and just set you on a good pace as you take the next step in your adoption path. So, Kim, there are many things that come to mind when we think about hearing, I hope I adopt before, from adoptive parents. And I would even love if some of you in the audience, if you were able to type in right now to just fill in that blank and say, I hope I adopt before. What fills in that blank for you? What comes to mind? Oh, that's great. Kim, we had someone, the very first one, that says, I hope I adopt before Jesus returns, which is funny because I actually
had
had
we'll still be okay.
Right, that's true. But I actually did. I had a single friend recently say, I hope I get a date before the rapture. So I understand sometimes that feeling of eternal waiting, like nothing is changing. Where am I at with this? But it's also good to keep a sense of humor about it too, so that's really fun to see.
Mm-hmm.
So we have next spring training. I hope I adopt before next spring training. I hope I adopt before the end of next year. I hope we adopt before our time with Lifetime expires. I hope we adopt before we go to Disney World, before my hair goes gray, before I'm too old to do so, before our oldest child goes to college. I hope I adopt before summer because I'm a teacher. I hope I adopt before my child graduates elementary school, before I turn 41, before our family vacation. These are all great. We hear all of these. And so if you're on the call and you're ever feeling like, am I the only one that's typing this? No, you are not alone. And so we want to address some of those tonight and maybe talk about some of the observations that we've noticed that come from maybe underlying fears or maybe a little bit unreasonable expectations or just out of whack expectations, and help you have as positive and as smooth a process through your adoption so that you're ready when that time comes. So I wanted to talk here, we have on this first slide, how do I balance what I can do with healthy expectations about the adoption process once I've done all I can? And Kim, what are some of those things, especially in the beginning stages, that are necessary for the process for families to complete in order to even get close to waiting to be discovered for an adoption opportunity?
Well, if we're starting from, the baseline, like the very zero, you are just very new to deciding you want to adopt, I would say figuring out what you're looking for in your adoption, age of child, race of child, those kinds of things, open adoption, getting yourself at a good level of education into adoption, have a good foundation of information so you can pick an adoption professional that can meet the needs that you have in your particular adoption quest. So making those decisions, I think, would be first and foremost, and then choosing an adoption professional and following their guidance and being proactive in doing everything that they ask you to do, such as the home study. That's crucial. You have to have a home study in order to adopt. There's just no way around it. Sometimes families delay a home study for several months, and that's ridiculous. You know you're adopting. You know you're adopting, so that's definitely important. I think that for most families, a home study should take about 6 to 8 weeks. But for some families, things may come up and it may take a little bit longer, but really stay focused and stay on track with the home study and set little goals along the way, even with the home study process, because I know it can be overwhelming and it's like we just need to get one foot in front of the other, and keep doing that, one foot in front of the other, and before you know it, you're to your next goal. So home study, for Lifetime's program, we will walk you through the whole profile development process. For some families, this can be a little bit of a challenge to get things on track, but that's what we're here for. So if you feel stumped, then definitely reach out to us so that we can help kind of open your mind and help you get some words down on paper and get things going in the right direction and help you get over that hurdle, maybe if you feel like writer's block or something like that. That's what we're here for. So don't feel like you're struggling out there on your own or paralyzed with indecision on your own. Reach out to us. If you're in Lifetime's program, that's what we're here for. And even if you're not in Lifetime's program yet and you're about to come into Lifetime's program, contact your coordinator that you've already been assigned and, ask her what you can do if you're starting to feel a little bit paralyzed with indecision or just kind of stumped as to what to do next. So
and this is
definitely,
a great tip. We just had Katrina here. She said checklists are helpful. It's very satisfying to cross things off a list.
Seriously, I'm a huge checklist person. Absolutely.
So these are all things that adoptive parents can, I put quotes around the word control because sometimes you may feel a little bit like all these steps are controlling you, but that you have responsibility. You have control and activity over all those steps that Kim was mentioning.
Yes.
And it is amazing to us how often families will put those off, and then they will still feel anxious about, well, I hope I adopt before Christmas, and we'll look at their file and say, well, that's not going to happen because you haven't even started your home study yet, or you haven't even applied yet. Come, let us get to know you. Let us get to know your adoption goals so that we can help you get on a track. You're not even at the train station yet.
That's a good way to put it.
Well, part of that, too, is, like you said in the beginning, learning about adoption is that very, very first step. So if we're going to think about, getting on a train, before you even catch a ride to the train station, you've got to research how you're going to get there. And that starts with questions. That starts with places like these webinars and calling or emailing Lifetime for some general information. Little by little, you will learn what's needed of you. And then you also start to learn about the other side of adoption, which are some aspects that you may feel a little bit out of control over. Like you can't shake a birth mother by the shoulders and say, pick my profile, pick me. You have to let her come to that in her own time and decision.
Yes.
You can't always control. Lifetime does everything to honor our commitment to our 24-hour availability to birth mothers so that we don't miss any interest, we don't miss any inquiries, questions, activity, or anything. But you've got to put your trust in an adoption professional to do what they say they're going to do on behalf of your adoption, too. And so that may even feel like, I can't sit over Kim's desk and make sure that she's, following through on everything she's doing. You sometimes just have to work with someone that you believe is doing what they say they're doing for your best interest and for your adoption's best interest. But I wanted to encourage with some of the points that we have here, because I don't want families to feel beat over the head about some of these natural responses to feeling a little bit like, how do I balance this? How do I stay excited yet keep my expectations in check? And like Kim was saying, it's good to set goals. Check them off as you get through the different steps to adopt. It's healthy to hope and dream. I'll tell you right now, and we've talked about this, we've heard it before, but birth mothers like knowing that you're excited about her baby. It's okay to not anticipate that with dread because you're so afraid.
Yeah,
or you're so weary.
Think that, Libby, an observation I've had recently is, someone feeling like they're kind of like too afraid to hope, and that is creating a lot of doubt in the phase that they're in right now. It's almost like they've been let down, they've been disappointed and let down, and things haven't worked out in the past, and this is where they are now, and it's kind of like just dashed their hopes, and it seems like they're really afraid to hope again. But I think you have to have that unbridled hope and faith that you are doing everything you can, so leaving the rest in God's hands and knowing that you've laid a great foundation for your adoption, and you know, it's okay to hope and be hopeful and set little goals for yourself, but not to let disappointment dash your hopes. If that's, does that make sense, Libby?
Well, exactly,
Really
because
good
I
talking
have
about
seen,
hope, I think.
well, I have seen that. I've seen that on both sides. Sometimes families, before they choose who's going to help them adopt, they feel so discouraged, maybe from infertility already, or maybe because maybe they've been turned away by other adoption programs they pursued before. Maybe they started with foster care and it just never panned out the way that they thought it would. You know, there's so many different stories that lead people to lifetime. And sometimes what we see are people who start to get their foot in the door and then they get afraid that they're going to get burned again. And they just, like you said, they get afraid to hope, but it stalls them. And I have never heard a family say, I wished I'd waited longer to start adopting. You know, usually it's people saying, I can't imagine my life without this child, but I wish that I wouldn't have been so afraid to start sooner.
And Libby, I love this comment. It says, I know that feeling and it's made me afraid to do a nursery.
Yes, and that was where I was going to. There are families on the
Mm-hmm.
other side already in Lifetime's program that we also hear this from, and it can really hold you back from some of the beautiful things that are going to happen in this time that are preparing you for your baby. But that is a personal thing, and I know even Lifetime's founder, when it comes to decorating the nursery, we hear that a lot. Should I set up a nursery now? It's really personal. It's totally up to you. But there are some people, you know, my heart broke for a family recently who shared with me that they actually put sheets over all the furniture in the nursery and they took down the decorations because it just was discouraging to walk by the room still waiting for the baby. And I just thought, oh, you know, I'm so inspired by the families who are able to walk by that waiting nursery and pray over it or journal in it or just walk in and touch things and let the emotions happen. You know, you're waiting for that baby, but this is my room that I've prepared. I've prepared a space for the child that's coming to me, and that they're able to look at that as almost like speaking it into reality. You know, so it's got to be your decision, but it's okay. It's okay to hope and dream and imagine bringing that baby into your house, you know, or what it's like when you get to drive home with your baby the first time, or get off the airplane and you see a host of family members with signs saying, welcome, you know, baby Sarah, and to just be excited. But it's also normal to hope it happens soon. Because we have to be ready for that too. That's the thing with adoption that I know is hard for a lot of people, is that it can happen anytime. It could happen right away, or you might wait, and you have to be ready. And I know that that can tax some people. Also, Kim, I know you were talking earlier about a family who actually said, I'm afraid to hope. And it makes me think of this next point where it came to my heart earlier when we were talking about what we would go over tonight. Every adoptive family I've ever talked to has triggers about where they get, you know, energized or refreshed or excited about their plans versus the triggers that bring on disappointment or discouragement or doubt. And sometimes that's a relative. Sometimes that is maybe an event. Like, one of the things that has brought a lot of adoptive parents comfort is when they've heard Marty herself talk about how she just avoided baby showers for a long time because she didn't want to go there. She was excited that someone was welcoming a baby home, but she didn't want to drive home in tears, you know, wondering when it was going to be her turn. And so she just decided to send a gift along in her absence and celebrate that life, but she didn't need to be there for the cake and games. Right.
And I think that is a very good example of, you know, an idea of what to do, because you can always trust Marty to do the ladylike thing in a situation like that, you know. So that's a great example. And even with Christmas coming and get-togethers coming, and someone commented earlier, the hardest part is when people ask, and we're in the waiting phase, and they're asking, when's it going to happen, you know? And sometimes you might just decide, you and your spouse go enjoy some couple time together, or start a new tradition with the child that you're parenting, you know, and maybe kind of break the mold this year. and don't put yourself in that position to be in the spotlight. That's really uncomfortable, you know. Talk about,
we do kind of live in a exactly. We kind of live in a world that almost expects you. You know, there's certain traditions that we do. You know, I have some divorced friends or single friends that they don't touch bridal showers, because to them it just emphasizes a longing that they're trying not to focus on, because they're trying to find contentment and blessings about the season that they're in. And it is okay. It is okay to politely decline. Or sometimes it's a relative. I've worked with some families, actually just recently, had one of our favorites, I'm sure she's on our webinar tonight, that shared with me how she had lunch with her mother and drove home in tears because her mom just doesn't get it. Her mom does not understand the adoption process in the way that Lifetime works, you know, and a lot of the older generations come from the days when adoption was very different than how it goes now. So they're thinking, why aren't you just on a list? You don't just show up at some orphanage and say, I want a redhead, curly-haired child, like, and you go home with a baby as soon as you're ready. You know, it doesn't happen like in the movies. It doesn't happen like it did 40, 50, 100 years ago.
Or like in Bible times, waiting a few decades.
Right,
So.
right.
Yeah.
You know, and if you have that relative, it doesn't mean you need to cut them out of your life, but to start recognizing how they trigger the way you look at and navigate through those adoption hopes, you know, and the pressures you're putting on yourself, because sometimes they don't always come from you. Sometimes those pressures come from other people. I'm sure there's people on the call who could even identify with hearing their own mother or sister or father, grandmother, anybody say, gosh, sure would be nice if there was a baby for Christmas. And you're thinking, I don't even know how to answer that. Like,
right.
You know.
Yes, it would be.
Yes, exactly. And it's okay. Like you were saying, Kim, I love that you brought up, it's okay to use this time in a new way than you've used it before. Something I've sort of come to practice, and actually I love this comment earlier, and I shared it with everyone. I don't know if you saw that on your screen, but now I need to get back up there. Thank you, Sherry. She said, one of my words is believe. Lord, I believe in your promises, and I believe you will do this. I 100% surrender and believe. And whatever it takes to get you focused on what's already happening and in progress with your adoption is something to practice daily, maybe even moment by moment, maybe even a Post-it note that goes on your computer screen. Or, you know, I like to, on like my phone's wallpaper, I'll have verses or different reminders sometimes, so that when I go to look, you know, at a notification or something like that, I will see it. I will see some kind of word or phrase that just reminds me, you know, of focus. Here's something
right now,
we have people chiming in.
What I'm doing along those lines, because I'm not really someone that likes to look at my cell phone, but I do spend a lot of time in my office staring at the wall. So, no, I'm just kidding. I stare at my computer screen. But I am putting together like a gallery wall with encouraging things that tie into, you know, faith and positivity and values that are important to me. So that might be something that you can do too. And maybe you do it small, like with Post-its, or taking up a whole wall, like what I have in mind. Or maybe it's portable, like what Libby said, on her cell phone. Maybe even a Post-it in your car. You never know.
I was gonna share a couple of the comments we had here from people saying, oh yeah, I identify with that. We have Julie here says, my mom keeps saying it would be nice to have a baby before the end of the year because she has had a grandchild born every year since 2003.
Talk about external pressures.
I know. Kimberly says,
she's like on a 10-year winning streak.
I know. Sorry. I know. Don't break my streak, Julie.
Wow.
Yeah. You know, you could get her an ornament that says, first Christmas without a grandbaby. I don't know. Sorry. You probably don't want to get snarky with your mother, but.
You don't want to get snarky, no.
Exactly.
Maybe thinking it inside your mind, but don't, yeah.
Well, and here we have what's hard is when other family members think you are too old, and that it's not a smart or wise decision to adopt at this point. And too old is relative to everyone. Some people feel like 35 is too old. Some people feel like 55 or 60 is too old, and that can be a lot of pressure. That can be very hard to manage.
Mm-hmm.
So and then we were talking. I just added here. It's common to have mixes of contentment and eager anticipation at the same time. So don't beat yourself up for having normal feelings. It's what you do with them that counts.
Well, and those are only two of the many emotions that it's normal
exactly.
to cycle through. Highs and lows. Contentment, anticipation, doubt. That's, and is it feeling like, well, now we had hope, but maybe we feel like we might be starting to lose our hope.
Right.
And, just continuing to relinquish that control that we don't have anyway, but continuing to give it over to the Lord, and because you can't worry and pray at the same time is the simplified nutshell little cliche saying that we have. You can't worry and pray at the same time. But it's so true, and it isn't.
I don't know. I do my best. I do my best to try and find my way around that sometimes.
I catch myself too.
But it's
because worrying is us, right, trying to figure out how we can
on our
prevent.
Own.
Yeah, trying to figure it out on our own. Yeah.
On a faith note, I actually had a really good session in Bible study a few weeks ago that keeps standing out to me, and the word was striving. When we strive against God, which are those moments when we are saying, why hasn't this happened yet? What is wrong with me? How can I figure this out so that somehow what I'm going through makes sense? Mm-hmm. Striving is, instead of just saying, this doesn't make sense to me, but I know you're there, and I know something is happening, even though I can't tell. And it was so interesting to hear it defined like that. But, what I want to talk about, too, is not only ways to validate and feel normal about the thoughts and the fears and the expectations and also the exciting things, too, but also to think about what are some of the risks of having, expectations a little bit out of whack when it comes to your adoption process. We already talked a little bit about it, but the first point here is, heightened feelings of disappointment or failure, or even heightened feelings of insecurity or anxiety about your progress so far. It's heartbreaking when I talk with someone and they feel like it's a personal, not attack, but a personal rejection, I think, when they're still waiting to add a child to their lives. And this feeling, just for those of you in the audience tonight who already have children, I know that this feeling is not only for those who are waiting for their first child, that any of you with a child on your heart that you have not yet met, that longing sometimes just weighs heavy, and you wonder, is this ever going to happen? And when you have expectations in check, you can at least go through those seasons of, hitting those roadblocks where you feel the disappointment. Gosh, it's Christmas, and I was hoping that I would have a baby, add a child to my life by now, but you're able to focus on what is happening and what will happen instead of just getting sunk into that pit of disappointment, and then you start to feel hopeless. And so, another one is sometimes having your expectations out of whack. And what we mean by this, too, is that, here's a funny anecdote. We have worked with families who actually put demands on us based on their timeline. I had a family who had waited with us, and I forget if it was maybe about a year, and they were having to update their home study again, and they actually went to the extent to demand that we get them matched before their home study expired. And all of us were thinking, how do we have that kind of control? We don't have that kind of control because we can't tell a birth mom to choose you, or that would be forcing her into a decision. Um, and so sometimes those expectations can put unreasonable demands on the people involved in your adoption, including that birth mother who's going to pick you to raise her baby. Sometimes there are families who get discouraged or worried about, trying to judge whether or not a birth mother is going to follow through with her adoption plan, for instance, and they might demand that, or try and demand, or put expectations on the way that she should operate in her adoption, rather than creating a unique experience with that birth mother and feeling out what is this like for her, how does she want things to go, and working something out that works for everyone. When you try and place those expectations on her, like, you're going to do it this way, this has been, my dream has been for some grand ceremony where you're going to hand your baby over and I'm going to be in tears and this music and these birds are going to fly in the background,
And swirling
instead,
around. Remember it?
Right.
We were talking about how
exactly.
Marty had
Yes.
a vision of swirling. I call it swirling around. What did you call it? Something else. Well,
Swirling
basically
or,
lifting the baby up in the air like Lion King, and then like swirling around, looking into the baby's face, and then that's your vision, and that's the painting you have in your mind. And birth mom may have a different idea.
Here's a great
about
question. I mean,
how the swirl
this is
takes
great.
place.
Tammy says, so what are realistic expectations? And I would say, some of that depends on what you're open to. There is a bullet point here we were about to bring up. I'm going to bring this up here. Sometimes out-of-whack expectations can actually put your adoption at risk, all the way from you are so hindered by, maybe the fear. Maybe you have negative expectations, then that you don't even begin the adoption process. You're never going to adopt. You risk your adoption. All the way to other sides where I've actually seen families be, they either have too narrow or too wide open preferences when it comes to their search criteria for their baby. And an example that always comes to mind is this one family who they were open to a child of any race up to 6 years old, boy or girl. They were open to pretty much everything. And we called them with a 5-year-old girl, and this birth mother was so excited about them. Because most of our adoptions are of newborns, so not a lot of families come to us looking for older children. But every once in a while we get those opportunities, and so this birth mom was really excited about them. And when I called them, they sounded disappointed. And I said, what's going on here? And they finally said, well, we were hoping for a hospital experience because when we adopted our daughter, she was already a 1.5 years old. And so what they were really looking for was going to the little isolette at the hospital and having little tiny newborn diapers and booties and little hats and the whole gamut. And I said, then why did you tell us you were open to a 5-year-old? And she said, because I thought it was what we were supposed to do. I thought it would get us presented more. And I said, well, you have been presented more. You've been going out to opportunities that you don't want.
Yeah.
And so her expectations were, I have to tell them I'm open to everything or I'm not going to get what I want. And what she should have done was just been honest about what she's looking for.
And I think that comes down to also communication, where we help a family understand when you're saying yes to something, make sure it's yes because you want to be chosen by that birth mom. And explaining how our process works so that families can make an informed decision along the way, But sometimes people do have a fear of being a little too specific. I've even had families tell me, too, that, well, we put that on the application because we were afraid we wouldn't get accepted if we put down that we were really only looking for someone under 1 year old. And I'm going, but like 95 to 97% of our adoptions are newborns, so if you're looking for an infant, that's still okay.
Right, and that's why we put in here that imbalanced expectations can also add pressure, undue pressure on yourself. If you're feeling like that family did, where I'm going to be judged and not accepted if I don't look like I am a certain way or a certain openness, or certain flexibility or whatever that is, then that's unnecessary pressure on you. You don't need to feel like anybody other than who you are. It's a lot of times that I will talk with even a birth mom. Here's a good example. Sometimes I will talk with a non-Caucasian birth mom. That could be anybody who's just not Caucasian, and she might hesitate at first to say, well, I'll look at families of all different backgrounds, but then when she talks a little bit longer, it's more because she's worried about saying, well, I would like a family that shared race in common with my baby. She feels like maybe it's bad to say that. But I always reassure her, it's okay. You get the choice. And the same thing is with families. Some families are called to be open to adopting in a wide variety of opportunities. Others may be called or more comfortable with more specific. And all you need to do is just be honest about what you're looking for so that the people that you're asking to help you can tell you how that's going to go. It's the same thing if you're hoping for a boy or a girl only. A reasonable expectation would be, okay, so I understand that that some birth moms know that they're carrying a boy and I'm looking for a girl, but there's a lot of women who don't know if they're having a boy or a girl. So I understand that it's not that I'm going out to half, I'm going out to only the women who know. So you kind of set yourself down like, but I know that I am called to adopt a girl. And you settle in that expectation. You still are hopeful, you're excited, but you understand and you don't have this expectation that you're going out, say, as often as a family who's open to either boy or girl, because they're going to go out to everybody, all the unknowns and the boys or the girls. So when it comes to, I hope I adopt before Christmas, here's one thing I just love to think back on. It's one of Heather's and my favorite stories. But it's reasonable to look forward to that because here's the reality. Adoption can happen in an instant. But the other side of that is don't set all your hopes and expectations on a firm deadline, because then when it comes and passes, it just sort of washes you away. And I don't want any of you, I want you to continue steady. I don't want you on these peaks and valleys. Because sometimes what happens is when you get dumped off the edge of a cliff, you take a while to climb your way back up. And I want you steadily ready for whenever it comes. And so don't be surprised. One of my favorite stories is a family we worked with, and she was a blogger, and she had blogged about a week before Christmas, sort of hopelessly resigning, and she said, another Christmas without a baby, and she was just very downtrodden. Well, her baby was born on Christmas Day, and we got to call her. And so not to say that we enjoyed her being wrong, but just to show you how fast things can change.
Yes.
She was totally trying to just accept another Christmas where my dream is dashed, and yet her son was born on Christmas Day. So she had to be ready. A lot of families, I've worked with some families where they were almost surprised that we called, not necessarily on Christmas, but any time. And I'm always thinking, well, you knew we were working on this adoption. Why are you surprised that it's happening? So watch the pressure you're putting on yourself to be something you're not or to be more than who you are. Just be who you are, because who you are is who that birth mom's going to pick. She's going to pick you for the right reasons. And then also you want to watch too, I just want to touch on this very briefly, but sometimes when families over-anticipate, or maybe they even go through actual disappointments and failed adoption attempts, sometimes they can build a resentment towards the success of other adopting parents or even a birth mother. And you just really want to watch yourself and your internal attitude about your adoption and about other people touched by adoption, and do what you can to keep a healthy focus so that you're not necessarily denying your real emotions, but you're doing something productive with them. Because if a birth mom senses in any way that you resent her, or that you maybe don't resent her, but you've resented all the waiting or all the process that you've done so far, or that you have any anger about failed adoptions in the past, or jealousy over other adoptive parents, she's going to probably feel like maybe you're not stable or that excited for her baby. So you really want to make sure you're not pushing all of that onto her unnecessarily. You know, that you're creating a fresh start with her, a fresh opportunity for that connection.
And I think, you know, the opposite of what Libby's described would be like selflessly waiting with grace. You know, with that when you look back on your wait, that you're proud of your behavior and how you kept your faith, and even though you had, you know, some hard days and some things you needed to avoid to troop through this wait, because, you know, I have to say that these years of working toward your family that probably start the second you decide that you want to try having a baby and don't end until you are completed with your family, those can be the hardest years of life. But remember, for most families, it's not the majority of their life. It is a small portion of their life if you look at, you know, seasons, yes. And so, you know, making it a selfless wait might be something to ponder. How can I make this a selfless and gracious wait? And it's easy for me to say because I'm not always faithful, selfless, or gracious. Libby knows.
Well, none of us are. But I also come from a position of it's okay. You know, some of the greatest friends that I've had are the ones that actually just don't make me fake it. They're the ones that will say, how are you doing? You know, maybe some of you have a friend or your spouse can do this for you in your life where Christmas rolls around and they just know that it must be heavy on your heart that you're still longing to be a parent. You know, Mother's Day comes around and they look at you and think, you know, I wish you were standing with all the other moms in church, you know, and that's a topic in itself. But that you can have those friends that validate you, comfort you, that they, you know, what can I do for you to just make this time easier? But that they also don't let you wallow in a time or a season or a pit of irrationality or unreasonable expectations or beating yourself up, you know, that they are also the people that are going to say, no, I get that it's hard, but not everybody's against you, or whatever kind of fears come up. But here's a great question here. I mean, this goes with those expectations. Is it normal not to have any contact with a birth mother, you know, for a year?
Yes, and it can happen. Yep. It can happen at any time, even though you haven't. Sorry, Libby, go ahead.
No, it's okay. You know, it's just that it only takes one.
Yes. And yes, we have many families who never had a peep out of any birth moms until they got that call and their adoption was complete. And I think it is wonderful when a family who suddenly gets picked by a birth mom that they don't need to scramble around and get things together and suddenly go get their home study updated because they thought it wasn't going to happen. Because that is a serious pitfall that we see with families, is when their hope starts to falter, that they let their concrete steps they've completed expire. For example, when we call and say, hey, we're running low on profiles, can you send some more in the next couple of weeks? 3 months go by, and they've missed all those birth mom opportunities. Or their home study is out of date, so they're not eligible for a drop in the lap. You're not going to get a 2 a.m. call without an outdated home study. So sometimes losing hope or letting hope falter can cause us to neglect the steps that are very important to adoption success, you know. So.
Part of what came on my mind when we put together just a sampling of some of the things that we hear, and I was so grateful to hear from all of you at the beginning of tonight's webinar with the things that you would fill in that blank with. But, you know, since we're talking about Christmas and the holidays, sometimes that fear or expectation is it's not directly placed on the adoption expectation, but sometimes, like I said, what I notice and where my heart goes out is because it's a pressure that I see adoptive parents putting on themselves. and that I know that that can start to grate away at their confidence. And where I want to see them is to recognize those and to think, well, that's not true. You know, any time I bring a baby home will be amazing. It won't just be amazing if it happens at Christmas.
Mm-hmm.
You know, but I know that sometimes that doubt, that question comes into mind, well, will I ever get to celebrate any holiday as a parent or with my baby that I'm longing for? Or maybe you're just not even sure, how am I going to get through the emotions that I feel when the holidays come? Think about adoption, but you know that around the Christmas season they're going to ask you, so when are you guys going to, you know, add stocking to the chimney or whatever that is, and that it's just, it can feel like a lot of pressure, and then people take it on themselves. And that's really why we wanted to call these out tonight, is to just try and maybe bring some relief to that so that you're not feeling so much like I'm the only one who said that or heard that or felt that. Because it's also exciting. It's exciting to go through and think, yeah, it hasn't happened yet, and focus on that yet factor, and you look at what I've already done. You know, so many of you I know on the call right now, you've done so much this year alone toward your adoption. So even though you don't yet see that baby in your arms, you're further than you were last year. You know, there's more personal growth, not to mention some of the logistic things that you may have learned or prepared. And for those of you who are feeling like, yeah, I'm not sure I see anything positive that came out of where I've gone so far, you know, I lift you in my prayers, and I just say keep looking for it, because there is something good in every season we go through, even in times of trouble and pain. But you know, to look at those underlying fears or expectations that come with some of these I hope I adopt before statements. Another one is, and we've already heard this in some of our comments tonight, so I'm glad we get to bring this up, but I hope I adopt before my oldest child gets much older. And you can fill that in with whatever you want, you know, before my child is 5, or before my oldest is in school, or, you know, I want my kids to be close in age. That is a real dream. That is a real expectation that you may have had on your life, but that it can sometimes add extra pressure to your adoption that's out of your control. You know, birthdays are going to come whether you adopt or not. And I always like to tell people, I'm only barely a year older than my sister, and, you know, it didn't change our closeness as siblings. You know, we're still very different women. But I've known other people where they're 10 years apart from their siblings and they're thick as thieves. So you know, closeness in age doesn't always determine that.
My mom and her sister, my mom was adopted, and her older sister was, I want to say 14 or 16 when my grandparents brought my mom home. And they are so close, very close. I mean, during childhood, maybe not so much, but all through adulthood, they've been really close, and especially now when they're in the same stage of life where all their children are adults. And remember, adulthood with your siblings lasts a lot longer than childhood with your siblings.
Yes, that is true. And but just to know, you know, I would say probably we need to even do a webinar with parents who have children, because a lot of times we get questions about, well, how do I explain the adoption process to the child that's waiting for a sibling? You know, I know that's a real struggle for a lot of you in the audience who are already parents, and each family handles it differently. But, you know, another one we go through here is, and not to sound too low, but, you know, I know it's a real dream that most people have, where they want to see their own parents as grandparents. And so sometimes we hear people say, you know, I hope I adopt before my parents are gone. Or sometimes it's just, I hope I adopt before, you know, my parents age more, just to where they're maybe in more of the care receiving rather than the caregiving stage. And that that's a real comment, a real feeling, a real sometimes it's a fear, and a lot of this has to do with asking yourself if, an example comes to mind. So by the time I welcome a child home, if I don't have any, grandparents to offer my child, does that mean my child will grow up without any grandparent influence or elderly influence? And the answer is always no. There's always people that plug in at church or in the community. Maybe they have neighbors. I grew up with 2 elderly neighbors on either side of my house, and we always had a great respect for them, but we also really enjoyed them. And they would always, kind of treat us like their little kids too. And so to look at what's coming out of your mouth when you express these wishes, but then ask yourself, but that doesn't mean it's hopeless if it doesn't go this way.
Mm-hmm. Libby, you had said something maybe in other webinars or in just other conversations you and I have had about, God's timing, and if you could know when it was going to happen, how would that change anything for you? Do you remember what I'm talking about when you said?
Yeah, actually, I think I just suggested that to a friend today. And all of us struggle with that because sometimes we think, well, of course it would be easier if I could predict the future and know when this was going to happen. Mm-hmm. But there have been times in my own waiting, my own longings, my own goals, and even in losses that I've gone through where I have had to ask myself and face those questions that don't seem real friendly. Some of you may have to ask yourself, what will I do if, my mom passes away before I bring my baby home? And just face it. And you might need to, it might bring some, but also to realize it's not a hindrance to your adoption, because most people would say, well, of course I would still adopt. It wouldn't change my desire to bring a child home, if it doesn't happen by Christmas or before my child turns 5 or by the time my mom turns 80, or something like that. But I would say it's a very normal thing for all of us to have these sort of timelines, these deadlines on our goals. And as we see time ticking by, sometimes it's very easy to feel discouraged, like, how did I get here? I never thought that I would get to this point and that it still wouldn't be happening. And Marty would even talk about grieving those dreams. Maybe not grieving the dream of not having a child because you're still on that track, but grieve the dream of, well, for instance, my mother passed away 12 years ago. I'm never going to get the opportunity to give my mom as grandma to my future kids. And there are times that that's sad to me, but the reality is there's nothing I can do about it, and it won't change the kind of parent that I'll become, and it won't change how awesome my mom was and that I can still tell my kid all about her. Mm-hmm. So I hope that touches on something for some of you who may have that fear, and to just maybe try and take the pressure off of yourself of feeling like you have to, meet a deadline, or your dream won't come true. Here's another one too, and we had this come up earlier. A couple people commented saying, it's just really hard when I see other people having babies or adding children to their lives, and I'm still waiting. And that's a real thing. I hope I adopt before my friend has another baby or has her first baby. And sometimes that's the pressure to keep up with loved ones. Other times that may be actually highlighting the fact that maybe people are so focused on their pregnancy or maybe even their adoption story in that other family or other sibling or friend that you actually feel a lack of support maybe from people, or they just don't understand the road that you're on and the support that you need and that you're looking for. Sometimes people, may think it'll be easier for me to go through my friend's pregnancy if I already have my baby at home. Or again, there's that worry, not so much of your own children as siblings, but, that you wanted cousins to grow up close in age, or that your best friends from college have, toddlers right now, and you thought, well, gosh, it'd be so great if all three of us had children the same age just so that they could be as close as we are as mothers. So again, these are just to highlight some of these expectations that there's a contrast to that other side. You know what I'm saying, Kim? Like, to all of these fears, there's this other side of, but I would still find people with kids my age to be very good friends with and to hang out at playgrounds with. It's not like my kid's going to grow up without friends. And I would still be happy for my friend if she had a baby or had another baby. Even if I'm waiting, I just need to find a way to cope with what I'm experiencing.
Speaking of coping with how you would cope with what you're experiencing, I just want to say a little side note that we don't have a slide on that I know of, but as far as marriage and what pressure, adoption pressure, might put on your marriage, and how maybe for one spouse they're okay not talking about it. The other spouse wants to talk about it all the time. Maybe one spouse is just silently holding steadfast to their hope, while the other one is just all over the place emotional about it. And that can be a little wearing on a marriage sometimes. And I think sometimes that causes the one who wasn't as emotional or as open in talking about it to maybe feel like they don't want to do this anymore. What about that? Because we have seen that, where someone is really struggling with the weight and their husband just gets so tired of seeing them being hurt, they just want to stop the whole process.
Right, and there are some families that are going to go through that almost where they sort of have to recommit and decide we're still going. And I know that there's some single women in the audience who may feel the pressure of, hey, we'd really like a grandchild by now, and you're focused on your career or traveling the world or serving on missions or whatever that may be, and it doesn't happen often, but in my time with Lifetime, we have seen families where they start adoption for the wrong reasons. Sometimes they start adoption just because people are pressuring them to become a parent. And so you do have to reassess your goals and say, no, that's still what we want, and keep pursuing that. But particularly if we're talking about couples, it's been sometimes that I've worked with adoptive couples where one is handling the weight different than the other, and we've heard on adoption stories before, how these couples will sometimes have a balance. I remember a couple webinars recently where they would talk about, well, when he was down, I was up, and so I would encourage him, and then when I was down, he would have the right words to say. And but other times, sometimes both of you might be in the valley at the same time, or not know what else to do. And that's where I do believe that it's important for each of us as responsible, functioning adults to also be responsible for ourselves. And if we know that our spouse is at a loss for how to comfort you or how to encourage you or how to motivate you, that maybe you need to look at, okay, well, what are my other options, because he's also going through this with me, and I don't necessarily want to, add extra pressure to him because now he's also trying to console, a struggling wife or a struggling husband, a frustrated husband or something like that. I think it's really personal between each couple. I'm not sure that there's one way to answer that, Kim.
I think what I just wanted to draw out was just being aware of that before you get into it, hopefully. Just being really aware of that and being accountable for how we, the things that we say to our spouses and, the emotions that we are letting out, to find healthy ways to do that so that our spouse can be in a healthy marriage with us, too. I hope that makes sense. And so that way it's not so wearing on you. And especially if, say that you might have a lot of lows and your husband just doesn't know how to comfort you with it, and he's done everything possible, and it's just not helping. And then you suddenly adopt, and then you want to adopt again, and he's like, I don't know about that.
Right.
So it definitely pays to try and maintain stability with our emotions, I think. Being aware of it.
Also, well, communication is vital. It's not just with your
Mm-hmm.
adoption professional. It's really to continue being open as a family with, with your partner in crime as you're pursuing adoption, to really communicate, this is where I'm at, are we ready to continue? And that's, honestly, I want to just say is kudos to everyone. That really is a blessing to see, because you hear so often about unstable marriages in the world in general, but really with our job, we get to see some amazing couples, and the communication and the way that they work out how to lift each other up, how to support each other, how to polish each other. Like, they really do seem to complement each other. And so one of the cool things that I think happens is by the time that people get to adoption, because those of you who've gone through infertility, the statistics say that there's a pretty high divorce rate among people who've gone through infertility. So I always have noticed that by the time families come to lifetime, man, they're usually on a rock. They have gone through some of the hardest times of their life, and they have some of the strongest friendships as couples in a marriage. They have strong marriage foundations, and so it's cool, because that's what birth moms are drawn to also. And so she's looking at that and thinking, man, I hope someday I meet a spouse that I could feel that, comfortable with and that secure around, that encouraged by, but also that accountable to, So all of, just to commend all of you for the fact that this journey has brought you into the kind of marriage that maybe a lot of people don't ever experience. And so, I mean, that's a positive that I see.
Yes. Yes, and that's another thing to make this an active wait, like we sometimes talk about, making an active wait by maybe if our marriage isn't exactly where we feel it needs to be, that maybe we've had a little bit of shaky ground for a little bit, use this time wisely to get back on track, work on, use some marriage tools and maybe go on a retreat if you can. I mean, that's a great thing to do. Go on a retreat or read a book together or do something to get on track so that when the time does come, you've used this time wisely and have that firm foundation that birth mom is counting on for this baby.
Absolutely. And I just want to say I love all these comments that are coming in. I'm trying to catch up. Let's see. Here Tammy says that's so true. We've been through so much. I love the comments some of you are sharing about how did you know that that's what my family says. And I just hope, I know we're focusing on I feel like we're focusing on some of the negative things, but what I'm hoping comes out of this is that you may just feel reaffirmed, and that hopefully, in my experience, it helps to shine light in the dark corners so that then you can uncover them, you can reveal truth, you can address them, you can grow from them. And I just want to encourage all of you, because while it is entirely possible for you to adopt before Christmas, if we're going to focus on that, I also know that you're going to be amazing parents whether it happens this Christmas or next Christmas or this coming Easter or sometime in the middle of June, maybe Flag Day, nobody celebrates Flag Day. Like, you're going to welcome a baby home if you're doing everything you can and that you're staying ready for that, and to keep pushing forward. But this one we brought up here where it says, I hope I adopt before my blank birthday. We hear this a lot. Going back to the couples, sometimes we hear from couples, I really wanted almost like a gift to my spouse. I really wanted to make him a dad by the time he turned 40 or something like that, and that may play into some insecurities that you have just as a wife or a husband, that you're thinking, I haven't been able to make this goal happen for my spouse yet, and I know that both of us want it just as bad as each other.
Yeah.
And to really just talk with your spouse. Sometimes I think what happens is people they get in their heads easily, and then they don't ask the other person, is this bothering you as much as it's bothering me? And your spouse might actually say, honey, I don't care when we become parents. I'm not that worried about it. And then you could say, okay, I really thought you were panicking about, your birthday's around the corner and this hasn't happened. And to just be open about it. Or if they say, actually, yeah, it's been on my mind a lot, then you could talk about that. But
yes, and I know that we want families to leave this webinar feeling encouraged and uplifted, but I think one of the secret benefits to this webinar is that people are feeling validated, very validated, like, okay, things that are going on in my mind and the things that I'm going through, the highs and the lows and the pressures I'm putting on myself, I'm not the only one, and that, hey, we're having a whole webinar about this because you're seriously not the only one. And I think there is nothing as good as peer support. When I see families reaching out to each other on Facebook, even just a comment like, hey, keep the faith, and, it will happen, and, just these little comments that I see on Facebook, I just love that peer support that you all are giving each other, because, yes, we're adoption professionals and we are here to support you, but I think there's a camaraderie amongst adoptive parents too, and I hope you guys are all feeling that tonight while we're together on this webinar.
And I know we've run over our typical hour too, but I want to appreciate those of you just sharing your comments and your feelings, your experiences with that. And some of you have had questions just logistically about some of the details, like if your home study is about to expire, or if we have enough profiles on hand, or how to take the next step. And so I just want to go back again and just encourage you, contact your lifetime coordinator that you're working with and make sure that she's up to speed and knows where you're at, and then she can help you with any of those questions that you have about your readiness and what's on hand. And if you're wondering, well, I'm not even sure I'm ready or I've even started, that you can reach out to us certainly and just find out, how we can help you get to the next step or which direction to take from here. But here's a way to focus, is sometimes to change your goal so that it's not so much a focus on, I hope I adopt before Christmas. I hope I adopt before our 20th anniversary. I hope I adopt before my child is in the 9th grade. Whatever comes to mind for you. It's kind of that same pressure, and maybe some people are motivated by this, but when weddings roll around, or graduations, or high school reunions, a lot of us, in particular, I would say women, put this unrealistic pressure on ourselves to drop a ton of weight and look a certain type of fantastic for an upcoming event. And, and I don't know about you, but that usually doesn't end in success for me. That usually ends in me stressing out about the deadline, and then I actually end up almost sabotaging myself.
I told Alicia, some of you may know that our Christine recently celebrated her wedding, and I told Alicia, so do you think it's possible to lose 20 pounds in a week? She goes, yeah, it could happen. But yeah, we all kind of do that with different things.
Right, and that's where I come from, because I also know how sensitive and serious a lot of these comments are, and again, they are okay to dream about. It is okay, especially if you haven't even taken one step toward your adoption yet, to think, in 2 years I'm going to be 40, and I was really hoping that I'd be a mom by now. Well, take action today, because the only way that you're going to, even come close to reaching that is if you put yourself out there and you're doing what you can. But for those of you who are already doing what you can, to not beat yourself up when you have those dreams, you have those goals, but to keep the timeline in perspective. And so how do I balance what I can do with healthy expectations about the process once I've done what I can? And change maybe instead of I hope to adopt when or before, say I will adopt when it's right, when it's the right fit, when it's the right opportunity, when, I've done everything that I can and it's for the right reasons. Keeping perspective is key, and I think one of the best ways to keep perspective is to really think about what a birth mom's going through to get to you, but also to just be gentle with yourself about the progress you've already made and the progress you're in the middle of taking. So if those of you on the call are thinking, yeah, maybe you're going to go through Christmas dinner and you're still going to be waiting to adopt, that in your head you can think, my home study's done, they have my profiles, they're even answering phone calls today. I have no idea what could be happening right now, and I'm still waiting, just eating my Christmas ham.
But you get to decide where you are for eating that Christmas ham. And if you decide not to be in the same old traditional place because you know the questions that are going to be thrown your way, maybe you decide to be somewhere else eating that Christmas ham this year.
Right.
And now might be a good time to kind of lay those plans and prepare people too. So, do what you know is going to help you with your, walking through these coming months too.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. That's what some of the most freeing and healing times for me have been when I have just changed the routine.
Mm-hmm.
And it doesn't have to be a permanent change of routine.
Right.
It could be that it's just this year that you needed to go that way, or maybe the next couple years that you needed to go that way, or maybe it's just holiday by holiday or milestone by milestone. It's okay to take it as it comes. But also to just, again, I always go back to, when you feel that pressure of time coming on you and you think, man, wouldn't it be amazing if I got a call while I was out to dinner for my 38th birthday and Lifetime called and said, come get your baby. Yeah, it'd be awesome. That'd be a memory, but it's also going to be an amazing memory whenever it happens.
Mm-hmm.
And do what you can now so that it's just a matter of time until you meet your baby. And I know that sounds really sad.
Mm-hmm.
And that is sometimes the hardest part. But as we've heard on all these adoption stories before, I just love how these adoptive parents talk about, I just kept thinking about, I have done what I can. I've done everything I need to. And
yes.
But in those hard days, they really had to focus on, no, I'm ready. I'm in the middle of adopting. I haven't had my opportunity come up in the way I'm looking for yet. So to just do what you can.
And you have to. You have to get to that point where you have done everything you can, because that's called adoption readiness. That's normal.
Right.
It comes with the territory. So looking around and thinking, what else can I do? And everyone's giving you suggestions, and you're like, I've already done that. That's a position you want to be in, where you've done everything possible and haven't left any stone unturned.
I love this, going back to changing the routine. This is exactly why we were spending Christmas in Disney World. I am totally jealous.
That's my kind of people.
There's nothing like Disney at Christmas.
Oh.
But, keeping perspective can also go to moderating your own thoughts. I know Heather at Lifetime, she's a huge proponent of your self-talk and what comes out of your mouth, reveals a lot of what's going on in your heart, but also that when we are more proactive and productive and constructive and positive in the way we talk about our progress, that it's reassuring us at the same time. And to just moderate your thoughts, and question, okay, is this reasonable? Does this make sense? Is this the truth? Will this immediately affect the outcome of my adoption, or does this change my dream of raising a child? And will this really change or affect how much of a blessing this adoption is going to be if I pass this milestone and it hasn't happened yet? Just kind of ground yourself a little. Keep yourself responsible for the thoughts coming out of your head and find a way to use them, make the most of them, and find comfort. Find the things that make you feel good. I know one of my favorite things to do is photography on the side, and part of why I love that is because I'm so focused on the people that I enjoy photographing that for an hour or two, I'm not thinking about any of my troubles or to-do lists. I'm just totally in the moment. And so it's a relief. You get to breathe, and you get to do something you enjoy that lights you up, that gives you confidence, and that all of us have that. So find that and be intentional in those times when you need to kind of pull yourself back up and find your light again. And then address any personal fears that come to mind, and then, take time. If that birthday's come and gone, we had a family earlier posted and said, well, my husband used to say he hoped by his next birthday, but his birthday was in July. It's okay to, not that you need, everybody's different with grieving and processing those kinds of things, but it's okay to grieve a dream that may have changed. Okay, now my dream is just to bring a baby home. I don't care how old I am, or if you are on the front end and you're just starting to research adoption, it's okay to grieve that, you're entering into an adoption that may seem a lot different than you imagined becoming a parent. To just be honest with yourself, I think, but to be kind and gentle to yourself through this process too.
Here's a comment. We love to travel, but we're terrified a drop in the lap will happen and we're gone. And drop in the lap, if you're new, means we call you and we need you to get there by that night, or the next morning we have a baby and birth mom she wants you to come get the baby, So basically, any travel plans you make sure that you can get contacted by Lifetime no matter where you are. Now, obviously, if you're on an airplane, then let us know that you're going to be in the air. And then the second you get off the airplane, check your messages and call us right back. Because that's a way a family did miss an opportunity, is that they never called us back. Isn't that crazy? They never called us back. Okay, that'd be the phone call I definitely would return.
Well, and
but yeah, it's okay to travel. Just have a plan,
Exactly. Yeah. Even if it's, while we're talking about the holidays, sometimes, in Northern California, we have areas where cell phones don't work, and we still have landline that we have to rely on. And so if I'm going to spend all day long at my mom's house up in the sticks and my cell phone does not work there, then send your adoption coordinator your mom's phone number so that we have it on file and we can reach you if something happens. Because we will do that. And we don't want you to miss an opportunity. And honestly, that's probably a whole other topic, is how many times that we actually see more adoptions fall apart because of the adoptive parents not responding than the birth mothers actually changing their plans. So, but again, just communicating. I think communication, being honest with the people who are helping you, not only about, how you can be reached, certainly, but about what you're looking for. And if you have questions, it's okay to confirm. Do you have everything you need? Because I think I've checked everything off, but I just want to make sure. And part of Lifetime's program does that for you. Every month, family gets a checklist so that they can confirm their status on all the different elements that we have keeping them ready to adopt. And so they can look that over and just reassure themselves, no, I'm on track, that all looks right. Or if something changes and it says status, pending, or we need more of this, or we need to hear about that, then you can respond and say, okay, I'm working on this, or I will do that. That you want to work with someone that's going to help you stay on track, so that you don't have any doubts that you are doing everything you can.
And can I share this comment? Especially, I'm sharing this comment for the families who think we're probably too old to get picked. Because on the flip side, here is a comment from someone who says, these webinars always give us so much hope. As a younger couple, some days we get discouraged that only older couples get selected. But hearing that it just takes one, no matter our age or how long we've waited, shows us promise that God will build our family through adoption. Everyone has their something that makes them think it's not going to happen. But I was just thinking about this for like the last 10 minutes, how much conviction I have that if you do the things you need to do and you're available when we call, you will adopt. You will. Just have to stick with it.
I hope that tonight's webinar has been encouraging. I hope it's been refreshing, I think, is a hope that I want to see in your hearts, just that maybe some of that pressure or that burden maybe just slightly relieved in your time attending tonight and spending an extra time over our hour as usual here. But I just really, really enjoyed the comments that you've shared tonight and knowing your struggles and your triumphs. And I just want to encourage all of you to keep doing what you can and to know how much we appreciate what you've already done in putting yourself out there, because we know it's not easy to put yourself out on a limb for, you know, a woman in a crisis pregnancy to just research at her leisure. And birth moms recognize that too. So if there's anything that, you know, we can encourage you with tonight is to know that you are not alone in this, and that while we may not be able to always make it better with words or have the right next step for you to take that's going to make you feel like there's activity going on in front of your face and that you can find that, I just love that we can all come together as a community touched by adoption and be here even though you're not in the room with each other, to see each other smiling or shaking hands or crying, wherever you're at tonight, to know that you are surrounded by dozens of other adoptive parents who have these same thoughts, have these same dreams, and that I hope that you can look around and know that you're all on the same team, and that if it happens for one of you, it's going to happen for the next one too. But I'm just grateful for all of your time tonight to submit your questions and your comments, and for hanging in there with us through these points, and just letting us touch on something that we don't often get to address, which may be the more emotional side of waiting and pursuing adoption.
Yes. So remember that if you are new to Lifetime, the very first step that we ask families to take is to fill out our application online at lifetimeadoption.com/apply. There isn't any obligation to filling that out. It doesn't mean that you have said you are working with Lifetime, just the same as it doesn't mean we have said we are assisting with your adoption either. It's a way that we can kind of meet in the middle and learn whether or not we could possibly be a team together, and only offer to assist if we're confident it would be in your best interest that we'd be successful for you. So that would be the first step, the free application right there online, really easy to find. You've heard me mention Facebook. If you don't know how to get there, go to facebook.com/open.adoption, and you will find Lifetime's page, and happy scrolling, you know, and clicking and expanding on comments and just being a part of community there on Facebook too. And then also, of course, we have an open door policy whenever you have questions or updates or hesitations or anything that you want us to walk with you through. Feel free to email or call. If you don't have a primary coordinator that you've already been in touch with, then you can send an email to adopt@lifetimeadoption.com, or you can call 1-800-923-6784, and we'll make sure that we reach back out to you. I know that right now it is after normal business hours. Normal business hours are usually Monday through Friday, pretty much 8 to 5 Pacific time. So, you know, we'll make sure that we get back to you within the following business day when we receive your contact. So thank you, everyone, for being with us, and thank you, Libby, for orchestrating our webinar this evening, and I hope everyone has a great rest of your night.
Great. We'll talk with all of you soon. Have a good evening. Bye-bye.
Okay. Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.